You are about to take part in a time-traveling road trip through pop culture. A road trip with a clear destination and many stops along the way. This is but one act of one chapter of the serialized journey.
So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
What? It's a potato! It's funny!
When we last left off, we were smack dab in the middle of our long odyssey into MST3K's sixth season with a trilogy of pain from Coleman Francis and the week-long detour that was our first and last annual anti-film festival. This week we'll visit the depths of G-rated depravity and some not-so-G-rated, courtesy of Ed Wood, dabble in the birth of 4 stars with the same basic story arc, and take a trip to another universe full of mutiny, facial scars, sparkly vests, and goatees. As always, I am Ryan Rodriguez, and you are stuck with the Coolness Chronicles Season 1, The History and Legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Chapter 9, Top of the Basic Cable Mountain, Act 5, Your Agonizer, Please. Ed Wood. What is there to say now? I held back on discussion of the man's work in the context of his first MST3K experiment, Bride of the Monster, in Chapter 5 for 2 reasons. 1, I believe that if you were at all familiar with bad cinema, he's a household name. And 2, my writing of the first half of the season was spotty at best, as I had no idea what I was doing. The key parts of Wood's life and career, those that receive the most notoriety or ironic attention, are very well dramatized in the 1994 film Ed Wood, even with the necessary biopic fudging of facts and condensing of events at the hands of screenwriters Larry Karaszewski and Scott Alexander. Everything from 1952 to 1959, Glenn or Glenda to Plan 9 from Outer Space, was canonized, excluding movies like the tastefully titled Wetbacks, and a movie we'll discuss shortly, The Violent Years. And in the modern parlance, this is generally the only part of Wood's career that people discuss. It was a time when his incompetence had an endearing, almost mythic quality. And then, well, the 60s happened. Wood fell deeper into depression and alcoholism, and the reality that his name carried little to no cash in an industry that he was desperate to be a part of was starting to sink in. In 1961, he directed his final real movie, The Sinister Urge, which we'll discuss momentarily, and he began to find paying gigs in a seedy subsection of the community. He spent almost 2 decades writing sex paperback novels and increasingly smutty movies, eventually getting back into the director's chair by the 70s to direct softcore and eventually hardcore pornography, many of which starred the famously well-endowed John Holmes. His last produced work in his lifetime was 1976's The Beach Bunnies, and after 2 years on a consistent vodka bender, he died of a heart attack in December 1978 at the age of 54. Wood has been embraced by various sects of cult film appreciation as a man whose talent fell short of his ambition. He never achieved his goal of making something as even mildly resembling the accomplishment of Citizen Kane, but he did make Plan 9, which continues to baffle and delight to this day. They say that those who can't do, teach, and those who can't teach Jim. Ed Wood turned out to be, all these years later, an amazing teacher. After all, in order for a medium to grow and evolve, you need clear examples of what not to do. And Ed Wood was certainly an expert in that category. Want to engage the viewer in a conversation? Don't write or block it like Ed Wood. Want to sell a special effect? Don't shoot it like Ed Wood. And maybe try a second take. Want to know how to structure a screenplay? Take Plan 9 and do the opposite. So let's get down to brass tacks and discuss Wood's contributions to Season 6 of MST3K, starting with Experiment 610, 1956's The Violent Years.
They're shooting back!
What'd you expect him to do, throw powder puffs? Get behind me, Satan, get behind me, Satan, get behind me.
Do what they say, Cheryl. They've got guns.
Yes, Shirley, we've got guns.
Come on, Satan, and push. What I
Hate you.
close, 'cause I can cause more trouble than most. And I ain't in no mood to boast. Get behind me, Satan, and push.
So what?
Get behind me, Satan, get behind me, Satan, get behind me, Satan, and push. I'm real gone mad, and that's just too bad.
These fool kids, when'll they learn?
These aren't kids. These are morons.
It's ostensibly a story about a girl gang of juvenile delinquents who are emboldened by lax parenting to turn to robbery, murder, sexual assault, and general moral decay. But like the next movie we'll discuss, I think it's clear that Wood doesn't believe an ounce of the swill he's selling. And the title is puzzling. Are we supposed to believe that a bunch of gun-toting girls who trash classrooms and molest men at Lover's Lane typify the barbarism of a generation? Or was it just a catchy hook to sell tickets? I'm betting on the latter. The Violent Years is Season 5's I Accuse My Parents if Jimmy Wilson was privileged and evil and not a complete imbecile. His polar opposite is Paula Parkins, named like a comic book character and played by comely Playboy playmate Jean Moorhead, who in turn was named like a potential Bond girl in real life. The movie also begins at the end of the story as our main character is being tried for her crimes and the judge drones on and on about the disingenuous message of the picture.
Adults create the world children live in.
And
In this process, parents play the key role. When children grow up among adults who refuse to recognize anything that is fine and good or worthy of respect,
there's a little joke in
no
Leviticus
wonder
that says,
that many of these children fail to develop high moral standards or to distinguish right from wrong.
Why don't you wrap it up, Judge
Their
Pedantic?
attitude
Come
is
on.
summed up in two callous words.
boring.
So what? Juvenile delinquency is always rooted in adult delinquency.
Why don't you shut up? Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
General
Oh!
acceptance of- Some people think newspapers exaggerate juvenile crime.
We don't. Can we go?
All that is
Paula is the product of an affluent, absent-minded mother who frequently borrows her car and awards her blank checks, and a father who writes for the local metropolitan newspaper and obliviously gives Paula the inside scoop on the cops' investigation of her gang as they hold up numerous gas stations, which is apparently lucrative if not decidedly uninteresting.
Well, it's impossible for me. I've got a newspaper to get out. With these young hoodlums running rampage through the town, I'm kept pretty much on the go. Especially at night. That's when they work. Who knows when or where they'll strike again.
Sometimes you sound more like a policeman than a newspaper man.
Sometimes there isn't much difference.
Is too bad. I can't be here.
In a scene that probably would have made the movie unsuitable for the show just a season earlier, Paula and her gal pals demonstrate their bold disrespect for common decency by interrupting a necking couple at Lover's Lane for no particular reason other than poor writing. They tie up the woman and leave her in the back seat of their car, and proceed to march the man into a more wooded area for some forcible sex at gunpoint, capturing none of the despair of assault, and instead playing out like deranged wish fulfillment. Writer Paul Chaplin puts it sensibly. Paula and her gang accost a young couple. The woman they tie up, the man they lead into the shrubbery making suggestive comments. The last thing we see is Paula slowly removing... Never mind. Advice to boys and young men. Do not think about this scene. Put it out of your mind. Work at your studies. Concentrate on your prayer life, and don't let your mind wander. Regardless of what you think maybe happens after the fade out, it's not real. It doesn't exist in the world, and it certainly won't happen to you.
Dr. Forrester has sent us a truly great movie.
Rabbit goes around the feet through the thing.
Oh, could you switch the radio station, please? She'll probably be okay. Bye, honey.
Don't wait up, honey. I'm doing this for you.
Now, if all four of you have to get involved, I understand. It could get rough, and that's fine. I beg of you, don't lightly kiss my belly, and then don't nibble at my nipple buds, and don't drag your shiny hair across my body, because I hate that. You know, there's a spot behind my ear. Please don't kiss there.
$11 went a long way back then.
All right, girls, can I see your park permit? Oh, my God!
Oh.
Okay, squeal, piggy.
What a great movie!
Oh, we gotta get Gypsy.
She's gotta see this.
Penthouse Forum, the motion picture.
Oh, tattletale. Jeez.
Paula and her fellow bad seeds, no pun intended, follow this up with a makeout/pajama party, but not before they meet up with crime boss Sheila, who has a truly sinister agenda.
Besides, there'll be a great thrill behind this move. And don't worry if a few flags get destroyed in the process.
Not Old Glory!
Let's just say it's part of a well-organized foreign plan.
Communism!
Wow.
You don't have to. All you have to do is what you're told.
Now go to your room.
How soon do we move? Just as soon as you can.
The bad girls destroy a lightly decorated elementary classroom set, a scene of carnage like clearing a teacher's desk, erasing some words on a chalkboard, knocking over some chairs, and chucking a globe out of a second-story window. This attracts the attention of a cop guarding the property, and soon the girls are engaged in a fatal shootout with two other cops.
Yes?
It ain't supposed to be
Isn't.
What?
this way.
She died as she lived, failing algebra.
The gang is cut down to 2 members, including Paula, who kills Sheila after she refuses to pay the surviving girls for their act of renegade vandalism, then gets into a chase with more cops and crashes into a plate glass window that kills her only remaining accomplice. Paula spends the rest of the movie confined to a bed in custody, either recuperating from the rather minor scrapes she received from the crash, or, after sentencing, preparing to give birth to the baby conceived during her forced group tryst.
Well, how's our little gun-toting trollop?
And because crime does not pay, she dies during childbirth, and we're suddenly back in the first scene of the movie, and the judge admonishes the late Paula's parents for being bad role models and not adhering to the Bible or the 10 Commandments or some shit. The Violent Years is probably the most consistent script that Ed Wood penned in the first act of his career, although I will confess that I only award this distinction based on the fact that I have seen only one other movie from that latter period. That movie, unlike Violent Years, was directed by Wood, and boy does it show in every frame and every line of dialogue. If The Last Experiment wasn't suitable for the Joel era, this one is the first real installment of what I like to call MST3K After Dark. It's Experiment 613, 1960's The Sinister Urge.
I want action on this thing, and I want it quick. I've got my whole department working around the clock. Well, you'll have more help to call on. I announced in the early papers I'm making more men available to you. Now, Matt, this smut picture racket has got to be stopped. And the murders caused directly by this filth has to be stopped.
When I say, let's see those legs, honey, I mean just that. Let's see those legs from your toes right up to your hat.
The Sinister Urge is about the smut picture racket, known today as that thing that the internet is based around. There's a good chance that in the minutes preceding your selection of this podcast, you yourself have run into some avenue of dangerous smut. Did you know that where smut breeds, crime follows? True, that claim is bullshit, but that doesn't stop this movie from making the exact same argument.
For your information, Mr. Taxpayer, the dirty picture racket can be directly connected to a good percentage of the major crimes in this city. Just how?
Well, very indirectly.
Listen, Mr. Taxpayer, the smut picture racket is worse than kidnapping or dope peddling. And
No, it isn't.
The same place with somebody. The morgue. Show me a crime, and I can show you a picture that could have caused it. Have I made myself clear?
It's a vague connection, I admit, but...
There is some debate as to whether or not Ed Wood made a movie about porn that is a definite condemnation of the industry. I am in the not category. Ed Wood clearly existed in a sketchier niche as a filmmaker, and I truly doubt that someone who sought to normalize his own transvestism could see sexuality as black and white. My theory is that he was intrigued by setting a story in the porn world that wouldn't be read by the money people, much less financed if it didn't try to lie to the audience about the harmful impact it had on society, even if that discussion has always been negligible but socially unacceptable to refute. For a movie that doesn't have a lot going for it, it certainly keeps a lot of balls in the air. Then it drops a few, lets them lie, and accidentally beans itself in the head with one or two. That's kind of stunning for a picture that mostly consists of scenes of people sitting in a room and talking, or walking into a room in order to eventually sit and talk. A pervert killer is on the loose, because 1960 was a big year for Psycho, and sexually motivated killers were hot. And the cops are absolutely certain that the killer is tied to the smut picture racket, and they're raiding local smut producers to prove it. This means interrupting cleavage-bearing models that don't even feel titillating for the time period, and confiscating hundreds of hours of film. It's this action-packed development that shifts the main focus of the movie to the undetermined region's smut kingpin, or rather queenpin, Gloria Henderson, and her business partner/director, Johnny Ride. About Gloria. She's a peach. If that peach had a maggot-ridden core and poisoned the tree it came from.
Honey, you're letting the flies out.
Laugh, it's funny.
There has to be somebody on our side that's tipping them off.
I suspect me.
Well, Carson can't prove you or me into the Jaffe operation.
He'll try hard enough. And if there is an informant in our organization, Carson may not have to try very hard. Now, what about Shirley?
Jeez, you could shave with her voice.
Dirk's already...
And don't touch the booze. That was a good crap.
Gloria spends the entire runtime wearing increasingly gaudy and impractical quote-unquote flattering outfits and lounging around on couches in her cozy, probably copiously stained living room. The outfits get to the point where, if in the final scene she just showed up wearing a spacesuit with the head of a Mickey costume from Disneyland, it wouldn't be terribly surprising. Gloria and Johnny are aware that the pervert killer that I mentioned earlier is in fact Dirk, who works for them, and they unsuccessfully try to get his behavior in line before Gloria's bosses, the Syndicate, decide that he has to be taken out.
Nowadays, these folks would have legitimate jobs for the USA Network.
Characters welcome. Johnny volunteers to take out Dirk indirectly.
I figured that moron was going to cause trouble.
Sorry, forgot my line.
Okay, leave it to me.
He gives him a job moving product out of state in a car with cut brakes, but Dirk survives the resulting car crash and goes after his superiors in a rage. The cops are at least 3 steps behind in discovering Dirk's identity, a position they remain in for the rest of the movie. Meanwhile, Gloria and Johnny go over their daily grind, no pun intended, debating over the diversity of the smut that they produce.
The crowd hasn't been very happy with our product lately.
You can't blame them. They want new material. Our stuff's been repeated too many times. We can't sell the same thing to the same old crowd forever.
I'm learning a lot about porn.
Johnny, played by Carl Anthony, is by far the worst actor involved with the production, and that's a tough metric. And he's hard at work recruiting talent for the next production, and meets a willing participant in Mary, whose middle name might as well be Naive.
Drink?
No, thank you.
Phone?
Smoke?
I don't smoke, but if smoking is important to the part, I'm sure I can learn.
Part? Oh, yes, the part in our next production.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yes, I think you'll do nicely.
You mean I get the part?
Why not?
You don't know how much this means to me. I'll work ever so hard. I'll do a great job in your picture.
Not like now.
I'm sure you will. However, there are several things to be done first. Do you have any money?
Well,
Dot.
Now, my dear, there's no need for embarrassment.
Yet.
I was looking for a job, anything to tide me over, when you discovered me yesterday.
Plus, I'm dumb.
And I couldn't write home and ask for help. I wouldn't want them to know what a failure I've been.
They run a successful porn shop.
That's the trouble.
It's possibly the funniest scene in the entire picture, because it tries to depict a simple transactional conversation between two human beings and fails in casting and staging, also proving that Wood could not direct overlapping dialogue to save his life. Robert Altman, he was not.
These things will cost a lot of money.
But I told you I don't.
Have any money? Where do you live?
Good.
In a boarding house on...
That'll never do.
Things are complicated further when Gloria enters the scene and classes up the joint.
Let's see those legs.
These legs?
Oh, brother. What's with her?
I haven't told her yet.
Well, tell her and make it snappy. I haven't got all day.
Have I done something wrong? I wouldn't want anything to ruin this chance you've given me.
No, it's just that Miss Henderson has a part in mind for you in her next production that deals with an extremely sexy type of girl.
Honey, she hasn't got it. Why waste time? What kind of a director do I have anyway? I thought you could Give me a
It all builds to the borderline incoherent climax as an injured Dirk arrives at Gloria's house only to encounter his attempted murderer Johnny. Johnny suggests that they team up, and they end up tussling on Gloria's patio. Gloria then comes home to a dark house and sees a figure in her patio doorway, assumes it's Johnny, and shoots him dead. Why? I'm not sure. She was sweet on him one scene earlier. Then she calls the cops, framing Dirk for the murder. The cops arrive on the scene and finally do some successful police work by identifying the shooting victim as Dirk, with Johnny already dead by Dirk's hand, lying lifeless in the bushes on the patio. Because detectives are traditionally coy, they decide to trap Gloria in her own lie.
Who'd you say this guy was?
Johnny Ride.
You knew him pretty well?
I should. He worked for me.
Now, Dirk Williams shot Johnny Ride, eh?
That's right. He broke into my home about an hour or so ago.
This is great.
Johnny and I tried to reason with him. We even gave him a couple of drinks. And then Dirk pulled out his gun, shot Johnny. Then he took off across the patio.
Oh, Dirk ran, eh? Now, let's get this straight. Dirk Williams shot Johnny Ride, and then Dirk beat it out of here, huh?
That's right. What do I have to do? Draw you a picture? He shot Johnny Ride right over there.
Over by the dead guy, right?
Sure, Randy.
Johnny, let's show her who she shot.
Take a look.
This is so great. The whole movie was worth it to see this.
Would our mystery stiff enter and sign in, please?
Dirk! No, that can't be Dirk. No, that's not Dirk.
How did you make such a mistake in identity, Gloria?
Up yours, gumshoe.
Gloria, smut queen, victim of her own hubris and sandpaper personality, is arrested for the murder, and the cop on the case artfully delivers the devastating moral of the picture.
Pornography.
That's what I'm in the mood for.
Nasty word for a dirty business.
You know? Huh?
These terrible Ed Wood movies make for perfect riffing material, but the episodes built around them are pretty damn great too. I could discuss every single host segment in the Violent Years, but I'm pressed for time, and I'm sure that if I ever got feedback on this show, I'd get at least one complaint for not talking about turning my crank to Frank. And if you haven't seen this episode, I apologize for the possibly obscene image you now have in your head. I'll keep it brief. The first segment involves Frank and Forrester initiating a duel with the Satellite of Love in a theme song battle, and they've come equipped with a little ditty called Livin' in Deep 13.
I was alone with the world to tame. I was evil but feeling blue. Looking around, talking to clowns, never guessing that I'd find you.
Working the friar, I was never a crier. I had a void in the shape of you.
Oh, friend.
Looking for love, hoping for evil. Alls I got was chicken cordon bleu.
Bada bean, we're living in deep 13. Nobody knows what we mean. Ruling the world with our heads in a swirl, and it's keen. Living in deep 13. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Frankie, folks at home, Mike, little friends.
This is a tune that has proved quite popular in the preceding years, even included as one of the many instrumental callbacks during the Netflix revival. But it's Crow and Servo's theme songs that I love most, even if they probably took 2 minutes each to write.
Well, that was very nice.
Wonderful Tom, Magnificat Tom Servo, bigger than life, bigger than you.
on. I think that's why did you cut it late, Spec?
Of course
There is. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was the end. I'm sorry about that. Crow, as long as we're stopped, Crow, dive in. Theme song.
What? La 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 la. Crow. La 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 la. Crow. La 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 la.
But in terms of sketches that got me to do copious research, let's talk about segment 3, which was totally outside of my pop culture comprehension. I've since learned that Tom Servo is dressed in drag as Barbra Streisand's character from the conclusion of the 1976 A Star is Born. It goes on for a while.
Ladies and gentlemen, Esther, Hoffman, Howard.
With one more look at you, I could learn. I can't. Oh, no, I can't. No.
So I watched that movie, but I didn't stop there. The homework spanned throughout the history of cinema. Let's discuss. A Star is Born is a story that Hollywood seems obsessed with remaking, with differing results. If you've never seen one of the 4 versions produced in 1937, 1954, 1976, or 2018, you can fast forward by 3 or 4 minutes because I'm about to reveal an in-depth spoiler. They all have the exact same structure, aided with variations and updated time periods. The basic story always seems to follow a talented but downtrodden young ingenue on the fringes of the entertainment industry, played by Janet Gaynor, Judy Garland, Barbra Streisand, and Lady Gaga, respectively. She becomes the obsession of a past-his-prime drunk and/or drug addict, fading superstar played by Frederick March, James Mason, Chris Christopherson, and Bradley Cooper, respectively. She's usually discouraged about the optics of fame because every industry treats women like garbage, but he helps her through her confidence issues and inspires her to not give a fuck about anyone trying to manipulate her image. The two fall in love and marry as the superstar uses his connections to get the ingenue onto the world stage. Soon she's ascending to the heights of her chosen profession, either acting or singing, and ends up receiving the highest award in said profession, an Academy Award 1937 and 1954, or a Grammy 1976 and 2018, only for the superstar to crash the ceremony in a drunken stupor. The tragic lovebirds spend some time apart, usually with him in rehab or a sanitarium depending on the time period, only for the two to tenuously reconcile, his career to completely vanish, and her continued ascendancy, and his taking his own life. Though each film could be broken down this easily, that's not to say that they're not compelling. It probably helps that I watched the 2018 Bradley Cooper film first on opening day, and was completely unaware of the formula. It unfolded before me and kicked me in the gut. I cried like an absolute baby, which I detailed on the mini-episode I did for it back in October of last year. I actually decided to watch it before I knew I was doing a detour on the subject, so the next version I watched was chronological, the 1937 original, which I didn't care for. Unlike the 2018 version, this was about an actress who rises as high as a woman could in 1937 Hollywood, but portrayed in a way that didn't consider that as limiting in any way. Next up was the 1954 version, which is neck and neck with 2018 for my favorite take on the material. James Mason is the self-destructive superstar, and few people could play a jealous prick better than he, and Judy Garland, the ingenue. While overlong at 3.5 hours, it hit all the required emotional beats, and for the first time, I truly understood why Garland was one of the most famous women alive.
It is bitter, the stars have lost their glitter, the winds grow colder, suddenly you're older, and all because of the man that got away. No more his eager call, the writings on the wall, the dreams you've dreamed have all gone astray.
Director George Cukor shot the film in super-wide Technicolor CinemaScope, and it's a wonder to behold. it also gets something right that I never seen done properly, and that is the fictional movie within a movie. Everyone from Mike Nichols to Robert Altman has tried and failed to show the shooting of a cinematic sequence in a way that couldn't easily be picked apart, but somehow Cukor did it with ease and aplomb 60 years ago. It's a minor thing, but I really wanted to point that out to someone instead of letting my notes rot in a storage box somewhere. But I digress. I didn't watch the first two versions because the 2018 version inspired me to. That was a side effect. I did all this to get to Streisand, because of one puppeteered meltdown. And it was the version that I liked the least. Actually, that implies that I liked it in some fashion. I didn't. Let's get into it. It's 1976. You're Barbara Don't You Know Who I Am Streisand, and you want a vanity project ostensibly about yourself. What do? The answer?
In the world of rock music, John Norman Howard was once the best, but he was burning out. Until he met
I believe there's a best of both worlds.
Esther Hoffman.
Old and new. Recognizing change is seldom expected.
Who wanted more than success.
I long suspected. They believe that strange was our word.
She wanted love.
Well, that is my soul.
Barbara Streisand. Chris Christopherson. A Star is Born.
Babs is Esther Hoffman, part of a trio of singers in a shit-kicker bar discovered by fading rock superstar John Norman Howard, played by a surprisingly youthful Chris Christopherson. When a difficult fan starts a fight, Esther gets John Norman out of it, and the two begin an off-and-on attraction that is frequently interrupted by John Norman being stoned out of his gourd and doing something stupid like forgetting about her, crashing a motorbike on stage, and destroying radio booths. Nevertheless, he gets her to sing in concert, and she becomes a sensation. They fall in love and get married despite the fact that Babs and Christopherson seem to genuinely hate each other, and soon she's on the ascendancy as his career is falling apart. See, I told you about the plot structure. Soon, John Norman's backup band records a solo album without him, Esther wins a Grammy, and an inebriated John Norman ruins her acceptance speech. He falls deeper into drug abuse and cheats on Esther with a journalist, and after a requisite breakup period, they reconcile and he crashes his car while drunk, though it's left ambiguous as to whether it's a suicide or not. After this tragedy, Esther mopes a lot, and when hearing a recording of John Norman singing, loses her shit a little bit.
John Norman? John Norman? John Norman?
Esther then headlines a tribute concert for John Norman that becomes about the glory of herself in a 9-minute take focused on the impetus of the production, Streisand being Streisand.
Ladies and gentlemen, Esther Hoffman Howard.
Are you watching me now? Watch closely
I was truly bummed by this point, as I realized that I sat through 2.5 hours of cartoonish, self-indulgent, expensive sludge to get a reference to the last 15 minutes. And the music, compared to the 1957 and 2018 versions, was sorely lacking.
Are you watching me now? Watch closely now. Oh, John Norman, where's this movie time? John Norman.
This was the second biggest grosser of 1976 after the movie we discussed last week, Rocky. I do not understand people. Pressing forward, the Sinister Urge has the drop on Violent Years as an episode, boasting my favorite kind of structure for a batch of sketches, the story arc.
We've got to help Dr. Forrester save Deep 13!
I know what you're thinking. Just what in the Hector Elizondo was going on here? Well, allow me to elaborate. For reasons that are never quite clear but are ultimately unimportant, as the episode begins and Dr. Forrester is set to introduce that week's experiment, TV's Frank is missing, and possibly up to no good. Forrester has been snooping, however, and kicks off an episode-long parody of the Mad Bomber action thriller genre that was so prevalent in the 90s.
In the line of fire, speed, blown away. Nelson, look! I was just tidying up in Frank's room and I found these ticket stubs in Frank's pants pocket. Now I really am worried. You know how easily influenced Frank is by the moving picture. Just look what I found in Frank's closet behind his Jane West doll. Dynamite. Not that I was snooping, but if I didn't snoop, I wouldn't know what was going on in Frank's life.
The situation turns dire in the Mystery Science Theater as the story kicks into explosive high gear with a resounding bang.
Oh, you want smart? I'll show you smart.
Whoa! What was that?
What the heck was that?
Wahapa!
Some sort of an explosion. Doesn't seem to be much damage, though.
Oh, looks like the bomb was sent up the umbilicus. You don't think that...
Since when did we get a payphone?
Oh, you know, I had that put in. There have been a lot of personal calls lately. I'm not naming any names.
Shut your pie hole, Crow. We've got bigger things to worry about.
Hello?
Hello, Nelson. Did I catch you at a bad time? I've heard about your explosive temper.
As it happens, when we return to Deep 13, Forrester is being held captive by a deranged Frank.
Dr. Forrester? Oh, he can't come to the phone right now. He's a little tied up at the moment. Now, behave, Doctor. I must say, Forrester, you really are quite a piece of work.
Frank, if you don't cut it out, I'm gonna kill you.
No, Dr. Forrester, it is you who are going to kill me.
You're stuck here.
After that Mighty Jack reference, Forrester screams for help to the denizens of the Satellite of Love. Crow, Servo, and Mike initially refuse the call, acknowledging that, if Deep 13 were bombed, it would get rid of the Mads. No more Mads means no more experiments. Not bad, but it also means there's no chance to get home to Earth. Decidedly bad. The next time we're out of the theater, Crow is dressed like a cast member on Barney Miller and uses his personal computer, established in the previous episode, The Starfighters, which, because of the thematic grouping we'll actually discuss next week, to check Frank's permanent record for clues on how to stop the Mad Bomber. Nothing going. Thankfully, Crow also has some informers on the street that he contacts via the hex field, resulting in some of the best host segments of the season and more cop movie cliches than you could ever possibly ask for.
Here's my main man, Huggy Bear.
Hi, Crow.
Hey, all right, Hug, what's the lowdown?
Pardon me?
Don't play schoolgirl with me. I've got so much on you, I'll send you so far up the river you think you were a salmon. Oh, I got it. Too much heat coming down from the man. I see.
Crow, that's not Huggy Bear.
I didn't say it was the Huggy Bear. I said it was a Huggy Bear.
Come on, Crow. Now cut it out. Now Forrester's life is on the line.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm copacetic. That's why I've got my main man, Rooster. Hey, Roos, hey!
Losing your touch, eh, Crow? Perhaps a nice traffic assignment would suit you better, mister.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How'd you get your desk job, Chunky? It didn't have anything to do with that speeding bus full of Cub Scouts, did it?
I stopped that bus and I saved them kids.
All except one. One you let drive.
Well, he showed me his license.
He was 7.
I'm a good cop.
Oh,
I'm a good cop.
Come on, guys.
Then, thankfully, a break in the case. Gypsy, who in this off-brand hard-boiled police drama is the long-suffering, often harassed secretary, inadvertently reminds Mike of food, and he recalls Frank's weakness. A plan is hatched, and it's surprisingly easy to pull off.
No, don't you see? Frank loves potato cakes. Get some and use them to lure him away from the dynamite.
Delightfully devious. Wonder why I didn't think of that. Frank, I'm stepping out, okay?
You okay?
Forrester gets the potato cakes and gets Frank to follow their scent, then disconnects all the various bombs planted in Deep 13, ending his fiendish plot once and for all. Frank's punishment being deep fried in one of the most disturbing images ever broadcast on MST3K. In addition to this plucky little plot, the riffing of the main feature sent me on a detour that was truly miserable. And I want to make something out of my suffering, so we're going to talk about it.
Let's watch Ghost Dad again.
Despite my best judgment, let's go back to 1990 and discuss what should not have ever been. A confluence of high concept and low comedy, which I acknowledge is redundant.
Elliot Hopper never has enough time for his kids.
Don't wait up for me.
I never do.
But today is an unusually hectic day.
Do you accept the Lord Satan as a supreme being? I've been meaning to, but I've just been so busy I haven't had a chance to get around to it.
In fact, it's his last. Now...
What's wrong with Daddy? Excellent trick! I am. You're a duck. A big sissy. Sounds like host. A host. A ghost? He's a ghost!
Ghost Dad, Bill Cosby. As you've never seen him before. Invisible.
Daddy, can I take you to Sean's house?
Ghost Dad.
I need to preface this by saying that Bill Cosby used to be one of my heroes. I will still maintain that The Cosby Show is the best traditional sitcom of the 1980s and is somehow a program that I could binge for days and be thoroughly content with. Cosby is one of the few stand-ups I've actually seen perform live, and he absolutely killed. But the man is a monster. And aside from that sitcom, I find it nearly impossible to watch anything he's in without wanting to reach into the television and punch him right in his muggin' face.
You are so funny.
I'm not that funny.
Ghost Dad is not a movie. It may have been released by a major studio in theaters across this great nation, but do not be deceived. It is a pilot for a shitty TV show, expanded to 83 minutes, and directed by the legendary Sidney Poitier in such a lazy way that it finally dawned on me why Poitier was always acknowledged as a brilliant actor with the word director only as a footnote. Now here's some background. When I was 13, I wrote and directed a feature-length movie called The Backyard Witch Project, a parody of that genuine box office phenomenon of the 1990s, Silence of the Lambs. I cannot act. I can barely read the things I've written. You can attest to that after all this time. But I still cast myself and my best friend in the lead roles, shot the entire movie with a camcorder in my backyard, trading cinematographer duties with said best friend, and edited 2 hours of footage through the use of connected VCRs into an assembly cut that for some reason I have not burned in effigy. It is not a good movie. It has maybe 2 good jokes in it, and they're probably accidental. I haven't seen it since I edited it and showed it to my family, who were kind enough to withhold devastating criticism despite my deserving all of it. But my quote-unquote movie is better than Ghost Dad. A lot better. When your first act's central hook is teasing the various grisly ways that Bill Cosby could die in pain, but your goal was to make a standard family comedy, you fucked up. My movie also has the added benefit of not having any rapists in it.
You listen to me, you little bag of pig puke. You mention one thing to anybody about this, and so help me, I'll do things to you that you can't even imagine. You don't try to threaten me, 'cause I don't get frightened. I give frightened. You little fudge.
He says that to a child. I assume he also said that to various other people in his unfortunately long life, but that's a discussion for another time. This movie is like corporal punishment. It's unnecessary and sadistic in its disgust for the audience, and it makes me sad. Sad that this world was once Cosby's for the taking. Okay, now that we've gotten over a case of angoraphobia, let's move on to the most ambitious episodes that the best of brains ever attempted. Experiment 611, Last of the Wild Horses. The movie is not worth discussing aside from the fact that it was a programmer western and the only movie directed by Radar Secret Service and 1/4 of Season 2 producer Robert Lippert, although he fell behind schedule and fired himself during production. It's entirely unmemorable and probably wouldn't ever be mentioned amongst hardcore Misties if the episode built around it weren't so unique. But before we get to that episode, a reverse detour is in order. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there's this show called Star Trek. It was on the air for like 3 seasons in the 1960s and was quickly forgotten. One of the more popular episodes of the original series was Mirror Mirror, written by the amazing Jerome Bixby, which featured Kirk, Bones, Scotty, and Uhura being beamed into an alternate universe populated by evil doppelgangers of the Starship Enterprise crew and the lengths it took to get back to their native dimension. An adventure that boldly implied that Spocks are a constant in the multiverse, although some versions may have a weird goatee. It's an episode that has permeated pop culture consciousness so thoroughly since it was broadcast 52 years ago that it's inspired more parodies than I could possibly count. And in October of 1994, the cast and crew of MST3K were eager to get in on the action. As writer and future star Mary Jo Pehl put it in the episode guide, "This was a complicated show to write. It required diagrams and flowcharts, but we'd been looking for an excuse to do this for years, and we finally decided to jump in with both feet." And oh boy, did they. I hadn't actually watched Mirror Mirror in at least a decade when I started researching Last of the Wild Horses, and I remembered the MST version being filled with references but not necessarily slavish in its execution. I was mistaken. If you have a favorite moment, they recreated it. If there's a particular line that you find amusing or a costume choice that you're fond of, it's in there. It's expertly directed by Kevin Murphy, who also puts in my favorite performance in the episode, a compliment that I will revisit when we discuss the feature film in the next chapter, and it is so accomplished and hilarious that it's the one episode in the entire series that I've watched numerous times for only the host segments, in addition to the full experiment. Let's dive in. We begin with a clever little trifle of a prologue as Mike reprograms Servo and Crow to use regional speech patterns for a bit of wordplay. But after the first commercial break, the episode wastes no time getting to the point.
I have an experiment for you around here. Frank, where's the matter transference device?
I didn't use it last, Clay.
Here it is. Well, this little device allows you to break down molecular patterns and reassemble them again elsewhere. I haven't gotten all the bugs worked out of it yet. Thought I'd try it out on you.
You know, there's a bit of an ion storm. Are you sure you should be sending that right now?
Nonsense. What could possibly go wrong?
Give me rocket number 9.
Sound familiar?
Kirk to Enterprise. Spock here. Report on magnetic storm, Mr. Spock.
Standard ion type, Captain, but quite violent and unpredictable.
Rough ride?
If we stay.
Stand by to beam up landing party. Plot an extended over to clear disturbance. Kirk out.
Comply, Mr. Sulu.
Aye, sir.
All of a sudden, we're on a different version of the Satellite of Love, and the roles are reversed. Forrester and Frank are clad in jumpsuits and acting like broader versions of Joel Robinson, and Deep 13 is populated with a sinister Mike, sporting Kirk's sparkly vest and Mirror Spock's goatee, and his yeoman Crow, who has Mirror Sulu's facial scar on his beak. How a robot can have a facial scar with the contours of skin is a discussion for another time.
So we're not going to do any experiment that messes with the laws of nature. You try your little matter transference device out on your own self.
Yeah, and you're just lucky nothing happened sending it up during an ion storm.
Oh, yeah, what he said.
The hell? What in the world?
You failed to properly compensate during the ion storm. Your agonizer, please.
But Captain Mike...
Your agonizer, please.
No, Mr. Spock.
Your agonizer, please.
No, Mr. Spock. I tried. I really tried.
Taking the place of Kirk and his three stranded compatriots are Servo and Gypsy, who've been thrust into alternate Deep 13, but they have very little time to assess their situation before Mike initiates this dimension's version of the weekly experiment.
Tom, what's happened? What's wrong with Mike and Crow?
What do you mean?
I mean, they're all evil and stuff.
Really? I hadn't noticed.
Well, don't you think it's just a little weird that we're down here in Deep 13?
Yeah, that is weird. Still, I suppose they do that kind of thing.
Tom, it seems as though the ion storm sent us into an evil parallel dimension. Our lives are at stake. We can't trust anyone.
Well, okay, let's just try to make the best of it.
Your movie today is a little western called The Last of the Wild Horses that I like to think smells like the inside of John Goodman's chaps. Yippee-die-I-A.
Shut up. And this one here is the 8 of Chris Lemon.
Oh, you look at that.
We've got movie sign.
Alt Forrester and Alt Frank enter the theater on the opposite side of the screen, and they sit in the 2 seats next to those typically reserved by Mike and the Bots after Frank gets a little meta.
Aren't you going to carry me into the theater?
Frank, you're getting too big for that.
Oh, it's my favorite part.
Just watch the show. I have that sciatic nerve.
The entire action of this picture was filmed in the beautiful Rogue River Valley and in Jacksonville, one of the few remaining true Western towns.
So even though the movie sucks, they still meant well.
They spend the first quarter of the episode in the theater and get some quality riffs in, especially a gay cowboy joke that predates Brokeback Mountain by a decade.
Say, you got a sweet outlaw ass, don't you?
You're big.
Sadly, they must eventually leave the theater to continue the story, allowing the writers to work in a reference to one of their biggest regrets from the earlier seasons of the show.
Joey the lemur, the friend to mankind, a furry kind of monkey friend, he really does shine.
Joey the lemur, he's great to have around.
Oh, this is worse than I ever imagined having my worst nightmare about.
This is horrible. There are no lemurs in this movie.
Meanwhile, in the Prime universe, Alt Servo and Alt Gypsy have been transported onto our satellite of love, although Gypsy stays off camera for now. But our Mike and Crow have quite the handful to deal with.
I order you! Let me go! You traitorous pigs! What's going on? Where's my personal guard? All right, Mike. Whatever your game is, I'll play it, mister.
Apparently some sort of transposition has taken place.
Extremely interesting, Plankton.
I have no idea why I said that.
Anyway, we gotta get him inside the theater.
What is it that will buy you? Power? I can get that for you. Money? Credit? Name it! Name it!
Servo's Shatner impression is probably my favorite moment of the entire episode, because I thought he was really overhamming it up until I revisited Mirror Mirror.
If we're here, what do you suppose our counterparts are doing back in our universe?
On our Enterprise.
I order you! Let me go! Lasers! Spock! Get these men off me! Spock! You traitorous pig! I'll hang you up by your Vulcan ears.
Yet again, I was mistaken. Thankfully for Mike and Crow, Alt Servo is surprisingly easily pacified for now.
Let me go! Would you die? I'll have you killed and then tortured!
Oh, hey, a cowboy movie.
Right. Just sit and watch it.
After 20 minutes in the theater, the story is back on. Mike and Crow address their multiversal dilemma as we meet Alt Gypsy, sporting Uhura's style, large eyelashes, red outfit, lipstick, and dangly earrings.
Something. Fortunately, I saved my alternate universe manual from college.
You went to college?
Well, actually, it was a Votech, but still, the manuals are our only
Well, we better
chance.
go get it quick.
It's a dangerous game we play, Tom Servo.
Oh, you mean like charts?
No, you fool. I mean power. Ultimate power.
Oh, yeah, right.
The power to rule the galaxies. It's ours, yours, and mine for the taking.
No kidding? Wow.
Are you man enough to take command?
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
Are
Heck,
you
why not?
sure?
Well, I don't know if I can...
Come here and let me make a man out of you, Captain Servo.
Oh, wow. Oh, geez, look, it's movie sign. Sorry, honey, gotta go.
I will be a captain's woman.
20 more minutes of the movie, and we enter the episode's endgame. Mike and Crow break out their handy-dandy alternate universe manual, and a mutinous Alt Servo channels Mirror Chekhov.
Okay, alternate universe manual.
Suppose we should read the introduction?
So you die, Captain, and we all move up in rank.
You do not. Get out of here.
You die, Captain. And the way you all move up in the rank.
No one will question the assassination of a captain who has disobeyed prime orders of the Empire.
In alternate Deep 13, Alt Mike is attacked by Alt Crow, and R Servo and Gypsy solve their predicament with the help of a familiar-sounding computer voice.
Look, enough with Joey the lemur.
You know, this just might be an alternate universe.
Well, duh. Maybe they got a computer down here.
Yeah. Hey, computer.
Working.
What sounds like Torgo?
Oh.
Who?
Hey, computer.
Working.
Say the master.
The master?
That's great. It sounds exactly like... What? Oh, right. Computer, are we in an alternate universe?
Yes.
Well, how do we get out?
Get Frankenforster to send back the matter transference device.
Say the master again.
Belay that order! Computer, would you put Frankenforster on the screen, please?
Oh, right. Remember, you're the evil gypsy.
Oh, Lord, I don't know if I can.
Could a storm of such magnitude cause a power surge in the transporter circuits, creating a momentary interdimensional contact with a parallel universe?
Affirmative.
Through Gypsy's cool demeanor, the matter transference device is sent back, and everyone is returned to their respective universe.
Wow. Okay, all right. Everybody here? Nobody evil, Gypsy?
Not evil.
I'm still not convinced it happened.
Perhaps an underdone potato, a bit of undigested beef.
Fine, Scrooge. Let's check on the Mads.
Okay.
And our versions of Forrester and Frank are seen for the first time since the opening. Forrester handily paraphrases a quote from a different franchise with the word star in the title.
Oh, I feel so strange. It's as if all my intestines cried out at once and were suddenly silenced.
We're treated to one more theater segment, which for my money packs some of the better riffs of the episode, like an extended weed joke and a reference to a beloved animated series from my youth, and one we discussed in Chapter 5A.
Just do a little morning bowl, then get to work.
No, you can't have any. This is $80 an ounce.
Just put a towel under the door.
So you want to walk across the street to Fenway and catch a game?
Rocky tells me that my men are no longer deputies.
Again?
That's right, Riley.
And Crow engages in some wishful thinking.
I hope he kills the Apple Dumpling Gang.
Me too. Me too. During the letter segment, Alt Frank and Alt Forrester manage to communicate with our universe via the hex field, and Alt Forrester keeps interrupting with a familiar recurring Trek reference.
Anyway, keep up the riffs.
Ah, yes, in our world, we too have riffs. We listen to many forms of popular music, such as your Louis Armstrong, your The Beatles, your Zylock Blues Band from Omicron City 3. Sure, well, we're sorry you have to go. I know you got around. Bye-bye.
That, my friends, was Last of the Wild Horses, a concept strong enough for a feature film, but used instead as the centerpiece of the series' best season, capturing all of Best Brain's ambition and eagerness to shake things up. And that is where we end this act of the Coolness Chronicles. Next time we'll revisit my lack of admiration for pretty movies, take lessons in how not to react from John Forsythe, spend some time on an army base with a wacko future congressman, and behold some of the most sexless lady wrestling ever captured on film. All that and much, much more as we continue to chart the history and legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. But before we sign off for the week, I'd like to introduce my favorite segment of the first half of the season of the podcast, where you, the listener, share with me the movies you love. It's time for Random Recommendations. This week's recommendation is yet another indirect recommendation from a podcast I'm a fan of, as well as proof of how long I've been storing these segments before broadcasting them. We'll See You in Hell is a horror movie podcast featuring comedian and recurring Better Call Saul guest star Joe DeRosa and television writer Patrick Walsh. While I only agree with their discussions about 13% of the time, there's a genuine tension to their banter as they discuss everything from the awfulness of Twitter to the virtues of Kingpin, all while arguing like two mismatched divorced people whose marriage is constantly on the brink of possibly reconciling. It's the closest thing I'll ever get to hearing my own bipolar interior monologue being spoken by actual humans, and it makes an hour and a half feel like 20 minutes, which is essential for surviving my day job.
Let's do
Give me a Jimmy Stewart ordering at a restaurant. Give me any restaurant. I'll do it.
Okay, I'll start with the what is it, pinto or black beans?
No, I give you the restaurant. You give me the right. Let's play like an improv game.
I thought I was going to be Jimmy Stewart coming through Chipotle.
No, I'm saying we could both do it, but I'll give you the restaurant to order. You give me the restaurant to order. Then it's like a game.
We're at two different restaurants?
God damn it, Pat.
What?
Ready? Jimmy Stewart ordering at McDonald's. Go.
When the show started, it was a collection of audio commentaries from movies like Leprechaun, Halloween Resurrection, and Clive Barker's initial Hellraiser film. During that track, 15 minutes of which is actually dedicated to the film, with an hour of giggle-inducing digressive nonsense, Joe declared that although Hellraiser was okay, its sequel, 1988's Hellbound, was the greatest horror movie ever made.
Brace yourself for terror you have never imagined.
And your suffering will be legendary even in hell.
And horrors you can never escape.
And you wanted to know. Now you know.
Last year, they brought hell to Earth. Now, they'll take you through hell. Hellbound. Hellraiser 2. Time to play.
I sought it out, first rewatching Hellraiser 1, because the first time I saw it I was stoned out of my gourd and remembered absolutely nothing, and by the time I started writing this particular segment, the format of the show had changed to a more standard podcast template, and they did an entire episode on Hellbound, during which Joe basically walked back his praise of the movie and deemed it merely okay. But when I watched the movie, I didn't have that information, so I was fully prepared to be blown away by the majesty of Clive Barker. I wasn't. There was a bunch of incomprehensible world building, an attempt to make Pinhead somewhat sympathetic, and a depiction of hell that, for all its design perks, makes it look like the Netherworld is a series of identical hallways. Every 5 minutes I said aloud to myself, did he mean to say that it was the best horror movie ever with the word Hellraiser in the title? This was an assessment I could go along with, but then again, I haven't seen the next 8 installments of the franchise, and I never will. So I learned an important lesson. When taking a podcast recommendation from someone whose opinion you respect, always make sure that they haven't recanted said recommendation in a later episode. But hey, Po Buddy's nerfect. Thank you to everyone involved in making MST3K for everything that they've contributed to my life and culture as a whole. Double thanks for writing the episode guide that I will quote frequently in this season of the pod. I also want to thank Shout Factory for their excellent supplemental material that was invaluable to my research for this and every episode to follow on this subject. If you want to support the artists who made this wonderful show, many episodes are available on VOD at rifftracks.com. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy what you hear, please rate and review the show on iTunes or your chosen source. Share it with anyone you can, any way you can. This has been the largest and most fulfilling endeavor I've ever seen to completion, and it would be nice to keep making the show until it just isn't fun anymore. Have questions, comments, or random recommendations, or is there anything I missed in this particular chapter? Contact me on Twitter at CoolnessPodRyan or on our Facebook page, and keep on the lookout for updates. Until next week, do what you love, don't be a dick, and as always,
I am impotent, and I like it.
Coolness Chronicles is written, produced, and edited by Ryan Rodriguez. Executive producers are Tracy Rodriguez and Luis Rodriguez. Original music by Bildschirm. Please visit bildschirm.bandcamp.com for more information.